Okay, so today we're going to talk about a recent study that I conducted on short and long distance transport of dairy and dairy beef cross calf. So here is the study, and for those that would like to read more about the details on this particular study. So basically, the most important and for this observational study, you can get more information about the prepartum cows and maternity and neonatal care, the fit for transport criteria and the logistics, and as well as the calf pre-weaning diet and management. And so the rationale for the study is in 2025, there is about 25,000 dairy farms in the US that, and there we have 9.3 million dairy cows. So we know that about at least 64% of the calf are raised off farm, meaning it goes somewhere else beside the source farm, and some could be within the state, and some other cross the state line. So meaning they go to some other location, across the US. Most studies, when it comes to assessing calf transport, they do involve a veal calf, which is quite different on when it comes to the logistic and how things are doing. Nonetheless, they are also transported similar to what we did in our study. So in this particular study, so we have a unique system, and that system also has, everything is under the same operational management, meaning that the cows, the source farms, the calf raising facility, transportation, and they are under the same overall management. And most of these studies, and in particular those that involve veal calf, has been shown that there is a poor calf health, following transportation, whether that is, diarrhea or pneumonia. And there is data that reduce average daily gain prior to weaning, and are also increased mortality. What we do know is in management, housing, and nutrition, and in particular, prior to calving, the last 60 days prior to calving is important for fetal programming, and as well as, at the maternity when it comes to feeding colostrum to this newborn calf. And those are key components when it comes to survival and growth of a newborn calf. So at the farm, this is just a layout, showing, where those calf goes and all the steps. And but in briefly, calf are born in this sort of farm, and they could be transported to a local market, and the local market, goes to some other location. Or in the case that the particular farms, they do have also the replacement heifers, they will be transported, and they go to the calf raising facilities. And we'll have the male calf or the female calf. The female calf, once they complete their growing phase and their development, and they are ready to go through parturition again, they will come back to the source farm as a future replacement heifers. But in general, most of the farms, the calf will follow some of these transportation process. So the objective for the study is we wanted to assess, the transportation duration, whether in this particular study we did half an hour, 8 hours, 17 hour, or 24-hour transportation period, and with calf survival, disease, in particular diarrhea, pneumonia, and pre-weaning average daily gain. And the hypothesis is based on previous studies. So we hypothesized that calf transported longer than 8 hours, we have an increase in incidence of diarrhea and pneumonia. and therefore, decrease survival and reduce average daily gain. And here is a little bit more detail about this specific study. So this is just one unique system that include the source farms, the calf raising facility, transportation. It's all under the same overall management. And as I did mention before, this is a retrospective observational study. So we get data from January 2022 all the way to March 2024. So there are calves that are born in 15 dairy farms, and they will be raised in 2 different calf raising facilities, right? And as the graph, the map is showing here, and we have this transportation duration. I'll explain now in a minute. So most of the source farm will be located here, and especially for multiparous cows. This is all multiparous cows. And here in the south, there is one also source farm, but these are all for replacement, first calf heifers, right? So the green square there represent the 2 calf raising facilities, right? So multiparous cows will have all those calves that are born. They will be either transported 24 hours to this calf raising facility. This is only for replacement heifers, and or they will be transported 17 hours. This is only for cross calf, right? Those beef on dairy, right? And here for the first calf heifers, also the majority will be, replacement heifers, but also there is some crosses like beef on dairy on first calf heifers. And so they will go to this nearby location, and then those crosses will be transported to the beef on dairy calf raising facilities. And for each one of the calves, we were able to follow, from late gestation all the way to weaning. So we have the parity, dystocia, whether or not the issues are calving, calf sex, breed, gestation length. This is an important item for the study. And in this, all calf has the same genetic base. So they were Holstein, Jersey crosses, and in this particular population of cows, almost 400,000 calf that we transported. So those dams, we divide them in 3 groups of gestation length. So normal gestation length for Holstein or dairy cows, it has a range, and that range goes from 254 to 298. Right, that would consider the normal range. And why we did that is because we know that in particular short gestation length has a direct implication in calf survival, and this is regardless of transportation, right? So any calf that was born, with shorter than 254. Or greater than 298 that were removed from the data set. So we keep most of these, gestation length and for this particular study. And another comment that I want to make on this study is that birth weight, we have individual birth weight for each one of the calf, and is strongly associated with gestation length, meaning, some of these short gestation will have the lighter calf with parity, of course, multiparous calf has more heavier calf, and the extended lactation. The extended lactation has more of the, a heavier calf, right? We did assess also failure of passive transfer, and to address the hypothesis, calf survival. And we measure both, calf survival at arrival and calf survival up to weaning. So weaning was measured at 60 days, plus minus 3. We did also assess, calf health, and in particular, the 2 most important to address the hypothesis, diarrhea and pneumonia. These are the most important in most of these pre-wean calf when it comes to health. And then also we assess growth. So since we have birth weight, and then we have a weaning weight, and then we compute based on age. We adjust those average daily gain at 60 days of age. So based on age, we use this formula to compute their growth. Here is a little bit more information on the logistics that I think is important to understand the outcome of this study. And as I did mention, we call the north system is where all the multiparous cows are, right? And these cows were bred, either a number of beef bulls, and those were providing the crosses, and but also were, replacement heifers also. So we did have, dairy heifers. And any of these farms, calves that are born in any of these farms, the farms were about, in between 10 and 150 kilometers, and from a collection center. So this collection center, every day they will get all the calves and they will go through the conditioning protocol that I'm going to mention now in a minute. There was in the south system, there was one more farm, and this is for the first calf heifers, right? So within this, what we call the south system is the two replacement, calf replacement facility, one for replacement heifers, and those replacement heifers will end up in this farm when they get closer to parturition. And in this farm is similar the breeding program as for multiparous cows when it comes to the using the dairy sires and beef sires. So there was replacement heifers that just were traveling a few miles, just to the calf replacement heifer facility here, and the crosses that were born from the first calf heifers and some of the multiparous cows who were housed here, they were going to this dairy beef cross calf facility. So what you see here is that once the calf going through the conditioning protocol, so each one of these arrows is just showing the direction that the calf were traveling. So they were traveling from this location to the collection center, and then once the calf going through the conditioning protocol, all the crosses were, were traveling, 17 hours, about, hour drive. A female calf for as a replacement heifer, 24 hours to these facilities, and you have these, half an hour facility that was just nearby the calf, the first calf heifers, and those crosses born here, they were traveling 8 hours to the dairy beef cross calf facility, right? So this is important just to give a view and understanding of when we are going to see now in a minute the data. An important component in the study, it was the fit for transport criteria, right? So basically, there was 6 points and that defined the fit for transport criteria. The first one was the calving pen and the maternity, right? And I added a little bit of the description here. The paper provided a little bit more details. And basically a clean, dry environment. There was a strong emphasis on sanitation, hygiene, right? And all newborns that were calved in this facility were washed right after calving, right, using warm water, right? So navel disinfection, the umbilical cord, so they were completely disinfected several times during the day. Most of the calves stay for within 24 hours, right? Once they were, they got completely dry, the umbilical cord, and there was no sign of swelling, they were transported to the collection center, right? All calves were fed colostrum, right? And so we do have the measure of quantity, quality, right, and the timing. Most of the calf got, all calf has one colostrum feeding, right, and within 2 hours, and a portion of the calf, that this is important because we have a little less than half of the calf, they got only a second feeding. So there was a group of the calf that has one feeding, and then it was a follow-up 6 hours later, and they get a second feeding. And this is important because I'll mention now in a minute the implication of extending two feeding program when it comes, when it comes to the, getting the calf immunity up and running. So handling calf with care. So this is more related to the loading and unloading of the calf. There was something important. I'll show you now a picture. So the gentle loading and unloading with emphasis on safety for both people and calf. General health status, this was done mostly at the preconditioning collection center. And so calf has to go through this preconditioning protocol that it took about 2 days. And so calf has to be alert, responsive, normal posture without sign of illness. And here is the condition protocol has 4 consecutive meals. So each calf will get 2 meals, 1 a.m., 1 p.m., right? So it takes 2 days for the calf, and they had to have no issues in these 4 consecutive meals to be able to get on, on the trailers. And mobility was another important item on the fit for transport criteria. So they had to be able to stand up, right, and walk around without any assistance, right? And then it comes to trailers, right? The trailers were, clean and dry bedding. And there was 2 types of bedding that were used, the deep sawdust or wheat straw, right? Most of the space allocation for on the trailers, so try to keep those the density on those trailers about 0.36 square meter per calf. And there was some periodic, regular checks that the calf were doing okay. And after the transportation, each one of these trailers was, washed and disinfected, and because they were using daily, so every day, they were going through this daily protocol on disinfection. Here is an overview when I do mention about hygiene, the typical maternity, the calving box, this is the type of bedding and the type of environment that the calf were born. And here is just the, once the calf were born in this calving box, they were moved to a maternity area were right next to the calving boxes. And what you see there is that this is the sanitation process. Every day they were going through this, using the foam to sanitize all these areas. And they also use an internal audit, and using these ATP swabs, right? Basically what it measures is any contamination on surface. And things that were checked on this on a routine basis was the pasteurizer, right? The feeding tubes and the bottles, right? And there was a cutting point when it comes to, sanitation. Anything that it was, if the reading was more than 30 units, and they consider that the surface need to be clean, so it's dirty, and if the reading was below 10, it considered that it was clean. At the maternity, once they get into the maternity and they, get ready to process those newborn calf, birth weight was recorded using a digital scale. Each one of the calf was washed, and there was, an ID, an ear with an ear tag, and based on these different combinations. So because the farm used beef sires, so there was calf that were just crosses, and there was calf that was replacement heifers, and then within the crosses there was also a combination. So the calf would get based on the type of what it desires their ear tag, right? Colostrum and was greater than in terms of quality greater than 22 in bricks, and about 143,000, almost 143,000. All calf received one colostrum feeding, right? All of them, but 143,000 received only once, and about 250,000 received a second colostrum feeding. So it was a gallon, of colostrum within the first 2 hours of birth, and a follow-up 6 hours later, another, 2 liters, or what is close to half a gallon, a little more than half a gallon, 6 hours later, right? This is important because now I'll show you the implication when it comes, especially to explain diarrhea. And there was, disinfection, very aggressive on disinfecting the umbilical cord, right? So this is a schematic representation when it comes to the loading or unloading calf, and the facilities. As you can imagine, this is, quite intense physical work, and so safety was important for both, for the calf and for employees. So we use these arms, right? These mechanical arms, and those are fitted with a winch, electric winch. So calf were fitted with this harness, and the harness, you can see the opening there. This is for the hook. So there was a hook, and the same system was fitted inside the trailer, and they were running on the roof, right? A rail right here on the roof. And there was 2 hooks. One on the outside was a little wider, and the hook from inside the trailer was a little narrow. So you can exchange the calf, right, and without much effort, right, just because the way that they, interconnect each one of them. So, but this is just to show how calf were loaded or unloaded from trailers. And this is the data showing, I did mention before that we were feeding, calf. There was a portion feeding 1 colostrum meal, and then there was 2 meals. So feeding 2 meals in this particular population of a study, it decreases 50% the probability of getting diarrhea. So it's a major implication when it comes to calf health. And I'll try to touch base on the calf diarrhea because it was the most important risk factor for calf mortality. And most of the effect, as you can see there, right? So this is the survival curve based on calf age, right? So all calf here is 100%. They do not have any diarrhea. And as they go by, days pass by, you can see this is the 1 feeding of colostrum, and this line, the dashed line, represents the 2 feeding of colostrum. You can see that by day 20, right, or about day 15, right, on day 15 or day 20, they reduced by 50%, a little over 50%, their probability of getting the diarrhea. So it's a significant biological effect, right, extending, colostrum feeding. Even if you mix with milk or a second harvesting of colostrum from the same cows in the maternity will do have some biological effect on calf, and that effect is shown on diarrhea. So the conditioning protocol, and it took about 4 feeding, and because of the logistic, 4 feeding means 2 days. So it took basically 2 days to get this conditioning protocol. So each calf will get 2 liters per calf, so 4 liters per day, right? And that the concentration of solid was 14%. And at the 4 feeding, so meaning at the end of the second day, right, the calf will get the 4 feeding, and half an hour later, they will get almost 1.9 liters of electrolyte. So this is important because once they get the electrolyte, after the 4 feeding, they will start uploading the calf on those trailers. So all those calf who drank the 4 consecutive meals without any sign of illness were considered fit for transport. So, remember the fit for transport criteria. And because they spent about a day in the maternity, and then from the maternity, they were moved to the collection center, right? Most calf, after 2 days, they will be about 3 days of age. So the average for the study is 3.2 days of age, right? Calf were loaded onto the trailers between 30 minutes and an hour after the last feeding, right? After the last feeding is when we will start loading those calves. And they were going to a specific, location, whether if there were replacement heifer, they were to the calf replacement facilities. If there was dairy beef crosses, they will go to another location. So in general, think about calf transportation is a team effort, right? And so for this long distance, in particular, the 24-hour or the 17 hours, there were team drivers, so at least two individuals. And this is a representation of the trucks. And to be able to transport almost 400,000 calves in 2 consecutive years, and we had data from about almost 3,000 loads, right? And this, as I mentioned before, this is the density, that on the space per calf, inside the trailer. So, and then you can see here, in each one of the sections of the trailer, how many calves there were on average. So 22, 33, 10, depending on the location there was and the space available, how many calves there were allocated to each one of these areas. Here is the age, the calf age at transportation. And you can see the frequency here, and this is the age. And because they went through the conditioning protocol, you can see in the south system, because of the replacement heifer facility was right next, a few miles from the maternity. So that once they were done in the maternity, they moved right away to the calf raising facilities there. Those that are coming from the north system, they will first go to a collection center where they go through the conditioning protocol. And some of those calves will be, about 2 or 3 days old, right? So, but you can see here, and that most of the calves, the average for the study is 3.2 days. They were transported. Some of the calves, you can see that it took a little longer to get on the track. And the reason for that is just they had to go through these 4 consecutive meals without any issues. So those are the calves that were able to meet the criteria for transport, right? So overall, these are just the overall outcome. Remember that calf mortality was an important component of the hypothesis, as well as diarrhea, pneumonia, and average daily gain. So we transport these 392,000 calves and 2,900, almost 3,000 loads. And the mortality upon arrival, so meaning the calf got on the trailers and they were, transported, is 0.015. So it's very low. We only got 58 calves which died, upon arrival, right? And we don't know, because this is an observation study, was based on records, on existing records. So we don't know if they were already dead on arrival or if they died right after, right? Calf mortality at weaning was, also considered, low, and the overall was 2.49%, up to weaning, meaning 60 days of life, right? So here is the data. I'm going to just take a few items that I'm going to cover in this table. And I think about this, the south system, these are the facilities. The south system, calf were either transport half an hour or 8 hours. And the half an hour are all the replacement heifers. 8 hours are all these crosses, the beef dairy crosses. And they were all born, whether replacement heifer or crosses, from first calf heifers, mostly first calf heifers. And in the north system, they were all multiparous cows. And so replacement heifers were transported 24 hours, right? And the beef dairy crosses, they were transported 17 hours, right? So one of the important is, as I did mention before, so it was very, very low, the mortality upon arrival. And there was no difference by transport duration, right? So calf mortality at weaning did differ, right? It was statistically different. And due mostly some of these confounding, either failure of passive transfer, calf diarrhea, short gestations, right? A number of the other factors that could be associated, with some of these early life health events, right? So, and you can see there also, calf birth weight, assistance, failure of passive transfer, diarrhea, pneumonia. So I'm gonna go through in a minute about the two other components, which is diarrhea and pneumonia. But I do want to mention, the calf development, which is, I think it's an important component for the study. So calf were able, regardless of transportation distance, they were able to grow, right? And there are differences in growth, but those differences are because of the confounding effect, either parity or breed or sex, right? Depending on which one of the calf we are talking about. And here is the calf survival curve, for time to mortality, in all these calves. So we follow the calf all the way upon arrival, from birth upon arrival to, up to weaning, right? And you can see here, this is the probability. So mortality was 2.49, and but the highest mortality in this particular study were for those calves that were transported the shortest distance, right? Those half an hour calf end up having the highest mortality, and the lowest mortality were for the 24-hour, right? So those 24-hour were very, very few losses. I remember half an hour, those are a female dairy calf born from primiparous cow, mostly from primiparous cows. And these are also the same female dairy calf born, but exclusive from multiparous cow, right? And whether they were transported 8 or 17 hours, yeah, they were about similar, right? And but these are born from mostly from primiparous cows, and these are mostly all of them for multiparous cows. So another component on the study was to assess whether or not there was a difference in calf diarrhea and pneumonia. And why is this important is, and in particular diarrhea, because diarrhea is the leading cause of mortality, right? So if you control diarrhea, I mean, you control most of the issues, at weaning, right? So here are the two graphs. So it's similar. This is the probability of diarrhea, and here is the lower graph is the probability of pneumonia. We also follow them up to 60 days of life, right? And you have the foregroup based on transportation duration. And this is something interesting here. Let's just take a peek on the first graph, and the top one, which is diarrhea. So whether they were transported 8 or 17 hours, which are the crosses calf, or half an hour or 24-hour, which are the female, they were not different. So there was different, but the difference is more related to the breed, right? So this is pointing out that there is a difference when it comes to gut health, right? These crosses outperform, even under the same management, will outperform some of the female dairy calves. So it's quite obvious the difference, right? And when it comes to pneumonia, something important here is that they behave a little different. How the pneumonia cases were there. So the most important here is these are the dairy calves, whether they were born from primiparous cows or they were born from multiparous cows, right? And so there was no different, right? But they start deviating. So some of these pneumonia cases start deviating about 22 days of age, right? 22 days of age is when you start seeing, a few more cases of a pneumonia. Diarrhea, on the other hand, is more early on in life, right? The first week, the first 2 weeks of life is when you see most of the cases of diarrhea, and then they follow up with some of the pneumonia cases. But when it comes to the crosses, right, the crosses, some important to make a point here on the crosses is the dairy beef cross calf, there was a difference in birth weight, right, of about 5 kilos. So those calves, this is the 8-hour. Those are most of these calves were born from primiparous cows. There are some multiparous cows there as well. And but most of these calves were born, not most, all of them were born from multiparous cow. So there was a difference in birth weight, right? So, but again, something that they do share, whether they were dairy calf or they were crosses, is that they deviate about the same age, so the same timing, right? To about 22 days of age. So I'm gonna go in a minute trying to explain, is that an effect because of transport, or this is because of the feeding program, right? Trying to understand what might trigger some of these issues. Given that the shared time of 22 days for these dairy or the crosses, the onset about, for all groups, transport duration alone is unlikely to account for the pneumonia cases that we observe in this particular study, right? So, and I'm going to go through, this is what we already know. Calves are very sensitive early on in life about, the osmolality of the solution, especially the liquid diet. And early on is when they are maturing, the epithelium in the GI tract, right? So once we fed the colostrum, so colostrum will protect for about 2 weeks and start fading out, and then the calf has to produce their own immunity, right? So in this particular farm, so because the cows, transportation, and the calf raising facility were under the same management, so the feeding program was the same for all these calves. So the first 21 days, this is how much they were fed, about a gallon a day in 2 feedings. Right, on day 21, they increase, about 5.86 liters a day, and about, day 46 is they go what the process is, the step down process, prior to weaning, right? And you can see here. So what we observe is the diarrhea were early on, like in any of the studies in the literature. This is what happened, most of the diarrhea cases. And in this particular study, we saw the pneumonia cases right about, when they were, changing, this up, increasing the milk. So what happened here is, in particular for the heavier calf, they, because of the feeding program, they will receive an estimation of about 10% less, metabolic energy, right? Which is, significant for some of these calves. And but regardless of the breed, what happened when it comes to pneumonia is that this point more to a feeding program driver, right? That is driving some of these health events, no transportation itself. And calf diarrhea, we did a number of analyses just to try to understand, some of these effects. And because it's an observational study, we try to overcome the confounding effect, right? Because there are a number of variables that could be confounded with others. But nonetheless, we did a number of analyses there. And the most important, calf diarrhea was the single most important factor explaining calf mortality at weaning, right? So it was by far, out of all these, right, diarrhea was the most important. So we know that if we control diarrhea, it has a major welfare implication for the calf. One way to do it is just feeding twice colostrum, right? It has a major implication because biological implication, because it reduces 50% the probability of getting diarrhea. And if you control diarrhea, you will control a major leading risk factor associated with mortality. So we also know that calf, either beef or dairy, so they are born without antibodies, right? They don't have anything, but they do have a basic immune system. It's not that they don't have an immune system. So they don't have antibodies. So that is why we need to feed, colostrum right after a birth. And why does this matter, right? Colostrum intake is necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? Why is that? Because if fetal programming, in particular the last 60 days of pregnancy, is compromised, right? Is compromised, IgG, we can feed colostrum, IgG could be absorbed, but the calf is not able to mount an effective immune response against pathogen, right? And this explains a phenomenon that we see is that we see high colostrum bricks, we measure that and it's high, and we also see high IgG in blood, right? Not only that we have quality colostrum, but also those IgG were transferred to the calf, so there is no problem. So you measure in calf and we found those IgG, and yet we do get sick calf. So, what happened with this is, this is an important area, to improve calf survival. Why the last 60 days of gestation matter for calf immunity. And the reason for that is because within the last 60 days, you have 50% of the fetal growth. So let's say that the calf is 80 pounds or 40 kilos. So 50%, 40 pounds of those, of the calf is being produced during the last 60 days of gestation. So there is an exponential growth in the last, portion of the gestation, the last 2 months. And this, in any dairy farm, this will be the fat-off cows and the close-up cows, right? And that area is where the calf is developing their immune system. So inside the uterus, the calf is developing the immune system. And the basic system that we do need, right, are those lymph nodes, the thymus, the spleen, right, the innate immunity, neutrophil, macrophages, and the barriers. The most important to control pneumonia and diarrhea is the GI tract epithelium and the lung epithelium, right? And another important structure in the calf that is right here on, inside the brain of the calf is the hypothalamus, right? The hypothalamus, the maturity of the hypothalamus is something that, the connections and all those synapses, it takes place in the last 60 days of gestation. So they can handle stress, they can thermoregulate properly, right? And another important is that the hypothalamus control the gastrointestinal, the GI permeability. So this is important, right? And so how do we, overcome some of these issues? So prepartum nutrition and controlling inflammation, those are absolutely important because that will have a major implication on fetal programming, right? So energy status is important, protein and amino acid, trace mineral, and then vitamin, the most important is vitamin A and vitamin E. And those will have a positive effect on that fetal program, right? So what we found in this particular large observational study is that key health-related factors early in life play a much larger role in calf mortality at weaning than transport duration, right? And why is that? It's because calf immunity is largely determined before the 60 days prior to calving or at calving is when we are processing, the newborn calf. And the most important is feeding colostrum, right? So nutrition, prepartum, management, prepartum, and at calving, environment, and in particular heat stress, because they have an implication on this inflammatory process. And housing, they all play a role, right, when it comes to this fetal programming 60 days prior to calving, right? And this is just, I'm going to have a few comments before I close my presentations. Calf transportation is a team effort, right? It's a team effort. You basically need 4 areas that I think are clearly important for transportation. One is the last 60 days of gestation, right? Another area is the maternity, where we process the calf and feed, quantity, quality, and timing of colostrum. Transportation itself, which is another group of individuals, and those facilities that are going to be, the calf raising facilities. So there are these 4 areas: prepartum, maternity, transportation, and the calf raising facilities. And something important for that is to follow the 5 principles of teamwork, right? And those 5 principles are, we have to have a shared goal, right? And clear roles, each one of these individually in these different areas, in these 4 different areas, they need to know what they are doing and why they do it. Mutual trust. They had to trust each other on how things are done and carried out. And effective communication, perhaps the most important is listening. And since you have a shared goal, you had to measure something. So you had to assess these processes, measure something, and establish a process of continuous improvement, right? So when we go through this team effort approach and training, and I also want to mention things, for calf, these are the things that are not, these are not fit for transport. These are calves that are not fit for transport. So those are the ones that do not receive colostrum, colostrum was not fed, unable to thermoregulate. So this is an issue for the calf. They were dehydrated, and many of those dehydrated calves, because they have some sign of illness, and in particular diarrhea or pneumonia, anything that causes pain, they don't drink. And navel, umbilical cord swelling or infection, fractures, lameness, or any other injuries, unable to stand or walk, right, and unassisted, or the cat has a recent surgical procedure. And with that, I'm going to stop right now and take any question you may have. Thank you.